А что, без коляски?
Нет.
Вот, коляска же надо. Давай мы сразу постелим.
Хорошо.
Давай, сейчас это. Потом мне надо сразу постелим. Выключи, давай. Я потом помогу. Я помогу тебе. Да, что там?
Делаю сюда поставь.
Хорошо. Постель, которую постель. А чулки дай сюда, чулки. Чулки?
Сейчас. Нет, это майки.
Майки надо. Майки сюда бросай.
Это черная же?
Еще потом буду складывать. Вот это сейчас постелится.
Really excited to see Ralph pop up and volunteer that. So thanks, Ralph.
Zach, this is Ava from Toronto.
Hi, Eva. How are you? Ava,
Good.
sorry. Yeah,
It's our
sorry.
Thanksgiving, actually.
Oh, wow.
Even though they shut down Toronto again.
Oh, yeah.
But Lisa and Zach and everyone, well, you probably already know, I'm a volunteer at the Royal Ontario Museum. And because I like you guys so much, I've even told the director, Josh Passages, how good you people are.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really...
And I'm one of 500 volunteers, and I think I know them. But I think of all the meetups, you're one of the best.
Thank you so much. Yes, we try, especially with hosts like Lisa and Richard, and now today is gonna be Ralph presenting on ships. People are stepping up, and I'm telling you, I cannot choose. I think everybody gets the best award for the hosting, and it's different. It's so detailed. Lisa definitely is amazing presentation. I'm blown. I mean, when I started it out, I was like, okay, let me just do this as a fun idea. But then it got really to a point where we actually do research and people read on things, like and now it's amazing. We're gonna do Plutarch in a Wednesday from next week, and people are gonna read obviously Plutarch, and we recommend people reading. Obviously, it's not a requirement, but Pericles, and then we can discuss the ancient text. So it even gets to the point where now we're doing ancient texts. So, what's next? I mean, next thing we're all going to get history degrees and be professors, basically. That's the...
Maybe. Zach, I don't know, and I just discovered this. The Archaeological Institute of America, how many lectures they have connected with sort of our theme that you can go on to.
Yeah.
GREE.
What?
Ava, I actually had posted on the History Channel's WhatsApp group links to some of those, not the lectures, but the list of lectures, because I stumbled across those. I'm a member of the AIA, and it was like, oh, wow, there's so many parallels and so many.
Yeah, it is. That's
topics.
right, Lisa.
Yeah. Super cool.
Yeah. I actually have a guy here, is a Brandon Larson. He has a Roman, I guess, Empire reenactment. He started the group, so anybody interested can join his group. And Brandon can probably speak about it at the end of the presentation a little bit, what the group is going to do. But it sounds like, that was, I only want to do a food part of the Roman Empire, where we're going to sit down around and, wear tunics and and talk about Roman feast, I guess.
Awesome. Zach, should we get the show on the road here?
Is Richard on? Yes,
Richard is on.
Okay, good. You can share now. Yes.
Okay, great. But welcome everyone. Again, the disclaimer is that I am not a historian.
Neither am I.
Really interested in ancient history, so I just want to make that really clear. And I'm really pleased that in addition to Richard co-presenting today, we also have Ralph that's going to talk to us, I guess, about a bit about naval warfare or ships in that time. Is that right, Ralph? You're on mute.
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect.
Yeah, focusing on the Battle of Salamis and related the naval issues.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we haven't decided like when you will be presenting. So I don't know if you want to start now or if you'd like us to just go ahead and get into the groove with things, and then you can chime in when you have something to add.
I actually think it would be better if he starts, because then we're going to go right into the Battle of Salamis, and so knowing the information about the ships and the architecture of the boats and how they work in the water is actually useful in that.
Okay, so and Richard, you're going to cover the battle itself?
Actually, Lisa's going to cover most of the battle. I'm going to do sort of the Persian thought process at different points, and a little bit more on the Greek counterattack. Yeah, so that's sort of where the division comes.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure whether I'm overlapping with some of what you're doing, but shall I just go ahead?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Go for it. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, Battle of Salamis, 480 BCE. So this is a portrayal of the battle. This is a Greek trireme center picture on the left, the center picture. Just a second. And the Persian trireme on the right. This was basically a battle of triremes. The trireme was the warship of the day. You can tell the Greeks on the left, they have the iconic crested helmet. The Persian triremes are often identifiable by the row of shields on that upper level. Now, okay. Okay. The Greek Navy recently reconstructed a trireme, and this is the Greek Olympios. If you look carefully at the picture on the left, those are just photoshopped identical pictures of the same ship put into a fleet. But this is a modern photograph of a reconstructed Greek trireme. The picture on the right is the same boat seen from the back. So they reconstructed it as well as they could, and then they tested it out, and I guess they decided, well, some things needed to be adjusted to make it work properly. And then I guess they invite people to row on it for about a month at a time. It takes a pretty skilled crew, and so they need training. So these were not professional crews. They were probably not nearly as good as the Greek and Persian rowers at the time, who were professional paid seamen, professional paid rowers. Normally the trireme had about 170 rowers on two sides in 3 banks. And I say these were full-time professional rowers. They were not soldiers. At other times, I think the trireme was used, modified, adapted for troop transports or other purposes. But the Battle of Salamis was fought between trireme warships, and they were dedicated to warships. Now, as far as I know, there have been no discoveries of trireme wrecks that could be constituted or identified. There are limited descriptions in Herodotus, for example, and the images are stylized.
Can I ask a question, Ralph?
Yes, yes.
And stop me if you're going to get into it, but who actually was the Persian Navy? I mean, the Persians themselves were not sailors.
Okay, I will get to that.
Okay, great, thank you.
So this is the same boat in dry dock. You'll notice it has the bronze covered prow or beak at the front. This was a ram. The primary tactic at Salamis was ramming the other ship, getting into position to ram the enemy ships from the rear or from the side, I guess usually from the side, and that bronze ram would punch a hole in the other ship just below the water line, or right at the water line, and the ship would sink. they seem to all have had eyes on the front. Whether this was so that the boat could see what it was doing, or whether there was just to make it look fierce and intimidate the enemy is not entirely clear, but those are the ideas. You notice very shallow draft. There's no keel, so it could sail very close into shore and just be pulled up on the beach. And indeed, they did have to be pulled up onto the beach when they weren't fighting. They were fairly fragile, not terribly seaworthy. They were built for speed and maneuverability. The keel, apparently there was a very shallow keel that was made of oak, which was very solid. But other than that, the pine boards, the pine planking running fore and aft was pine or fir. So for lightness of weight, it was light, flexible, but not terribly strong. To get 3 oars on top of each other, so a trireme has 3 banks of oars, one on top of the other, and to make that work, the top row was put on what they call an outrigger. That is a sort of a deck cantilevered out over the 2 decks below. So there were two rows of, so one row of rowers just about 18 inches above the water line, close to the water line, another a second row above that, and then the top row above that. Now this seems to be much more open than the actual triremes, because they were warships and intended for close-in fighting. They were generally sealed off. I guess there's a term which I ran into called cataphract, which refers to a closed in. I guess it's used for armored soldiers as well, where it means a covered or armored soldier. In this case, it means a covered boat, not really armored, but at least with some light wooden planking over the rowers with oar holes through them. So, as I say, these are the sources, these are the images, the ancient images. On the left, you've got a Phoenician bireme from about 700 BC, one of the earlier big major boats or warships. The Phoenicians really developed the ocean-going boats, and of course they were great traders starting around 1500 BC. So, but this was a big row, 120 rowers, about 24 meters long by 3 meters wide. And I guess that's fairly typical. The warships, which were built for speed, were very streamlined. They were about 8 times as long as they were wide, unlike a cargo ship, which was more like 3 times as long as it was wide. So these were very long and streamlined. They really only had room. Typical trireme had 170 rowers, and by the Battle of Salamis, they seem to have been pretty standardized, and the Greek and the Persian triremes were almost identical in function. I guess they'd been developed to a maximum performance, and everybody used the same design. So other than, say, the shields or some of the crests and so on, it's really hard to tell. The picture in the upper right is a Greek trireme from 410, about 410 BC, so not too long after Salamis. This is a marble bas-relief from the Acropolis. And the lower right is a picture from Greek pottery from about 500 BC. And this is a bireme. This seems to have two layers of oars. And around 500 BC seems to have been a bit of a transition. They started out with a single layer, and then around 500 they started introducing a second layer of rowers. And by the time of Salamis, not too long before that, they'd introduced the trireme with the 3 rows of oars, which gives you I guess the optimum performance. You can't really get more by going bigger. You can build bigger ships, but they're not better fighting ships if you go any bigger than the trireme. Okay, this is just another image showing a cutaway of a Greek trireme with the walls removed. Now, as this one shows, they did have a top deck above the third level of rowers. The third level of rowers was covered up and had a deck over them. And the top deck was used for the captain and soldiers. So every trireme, typically they had, as shown at the back there, they had 4 or 5 archers and maybe a dozen spearmen or javelin throwers or spearmen. So they had a group of fighters on the top deck. The hold was devoted entirely to the rowers. They had no cargo, virtually no cargo capacity. So they could do some surface fighting, and for close in, they needed to do that. When you rammed another ship, then of course the soldiers on the other ship were going to attack. So there was sort of some ship-to-ship fighting and grappling. Let's see, if we go back, if you'll notice on the picture on the right, the rear of the ship, there are a couple of ladders, and those were used for the ship-to-ship fighting. If you closed with another ship, you'd put some ladders over and you'd board the other ship and try to destroy the other ship that way. When you were moving a ship from place to place, you would put up 1 or 2 masts, a main mast and perhaps a smaller front mast, big square sails, a big square sail on the main mast and a smaller one on the front mast. For fighting, the masts and the sails would be removed and left on shore. They would get in the way. For fighting, you need rapid 360-degree mobility, turning. The sails would get in the way and the masts would act extra weight. So the fighting ships never use sails, but they could be equipped with sails for getting somewhere. This is I don't know if how I can remember actually seeing this. This is a still from the film Ben-Hur, and it's probably not a totally wrong idea of what it looked like. It was closed in. It was hot, it was sweaty, it was hard work. These were very trained athletes. Now, I think he had people at the extreme upper right, you'll have people, I think he had people with whips. And I think the idea that these were slaves who were whipped to perform is probably false. These were professional soldiers. They were paid like any other soldier. They were doing their best. And of course, their survival depended on their skills and their obedience to orders. They were very highly trained because they were very closely packed. 3 rowers here. As this indicates, and I'll show a bit more, there was a top outside row with a top oarsman, a middle. Inside of that was a middle and slightly lower, and then inside of that was again a slightly lower level. So they were staggered from outside to inside and from top to bottom to give them reasonable clearance on their oars. They were spaced about a meter apart, and with the 3 layers of oars, the oars were about 1 foot apart. So it required very highly precision rowing to keep the oars from getting tangled up with each other and hitting each other and fouling each other. So it was a very highly trained, precision, coordinated fighting force and fighting tool. Here's just some statistics. Apparently, rowing speed over some distance was about 8 knots, about 10 miles an hour. With a sail, they could go somewhat faster with the wind behind them. Now, with a square sail, you can only sail with the wind more or less behind you. You can't sail with a square sail, you cannot sail upwind. So sailing was limited to pretty more or less downwind sailing. I guess maximum speed with I guess rowing speed. Sometimes I guess in Ben-Hur, I think they called it ramming speed, when you really had to push to get the advantage on the opponent. They could go up to 14 knots, but they were very high acceleration. Apparently they could go from 0 to 8 knots in 30 seconds, and they could turn very quickly. If one side stopped rowing, and the other side kept rowing, they could turn 180 degrees in about 2 ship diameters. Let me go back. Let's see. Okay, this one on the left-hand image, at the back of the ship, you see the helmsman. There are 2 steering oars at the stern, one on either side, connected with a crossbar at the top, and the helmsman would move the crossbar from side to side to do the steering, using both oars connected, coordinated simultaneously. And then, as I say, you could also stop rowing on one side and keep rowing on the other side to make a fast turn. Whether you could perhaps do backwater on one side and rowing on the other side to get an even faster turn, I'm not sure, but very good at turning. The previous ship, there were biremes before that, and other ships called pentaconters. The pentaconters were the standard ship prior to the biremes and triremes. The pentaconter, the penta is 5. This is a single layer 50 oar boat, and that was apparently pretty standard. In Homer, in Ulysses, Homer talks about Ulysses coming home in a boat with 52 oarsmen. And that was sort of the standard. So that was 1200 BC. So the single layer pentaconter was a standard transport ship and warship before the triremes became standard. And I guess the trireme was 30% faster according to some of the studies and tests. So not a great deal, but 30% could be the difference between winning and losing in a naval battle. They were typically, as I say, 35 to 40 meters long, fairly standardized, 5 to 6 meters wide, with about a 90 centimeter seat spacing. 3 layers of oars, I guess commonly 31 oars in the top layer and 27, 28 in the bottom 2 layers. The oars, I was slightly surprised. The oars were apparently about all the same length, about 4 meters long, and they had about 30 centimeters spacing between the oars when they were rowing. So, as I say, very closely spaced. The lowest level rowers were 18 inches above the water, and that meant they couldn't really be used with waves that were much over that. I guess they could go in waves up to about 3 feet high, about 1 meter, but beyond that, they were pretty fragile and not terribly seaworthy. So they were relatively calm conditions. Now the Aegean is not particularly stormy, but it does have storms, so they couldn't be used in stormy weather. About 170 rowers. Then they had a captain, a helmsman, typically 4 archers and 14 spearmen on the top deck, and then 25 other crew. They had the sailmasters, who probably would disembark before battle. In fact, many of these crews probably would. A sail master, a carpenter for repairs. They had a lookout who would be, I guess, perched on the high part at the back to spot the other ships and try and see what was going on and to plan the battle in conjunction with the helmsman and the captain. The rowers need to be synchronized, and I think because the ship was fairly long, they needed a synchronizer at the two synchronizers yelling out the beat at the front of the back, and then they often had a piper, an aulos, also playing to keep the sync going, and they could speed up or slow down depending on the requirements in response to the captain or the helmsman. And then there were some other sort of administrative crews, supervisory crews. So there were a small number of other crew around. I say maximum waves about 1 meter, and they were in trouble with that. The keel was normally of oak, the planks were of pine or fir. Now perhaps I'm overlapping, but just for the fleet that came to Salamis, came in parallel with the land force. So from Anatolia, now this doesn't show the fleet starting in Anatolia, but I think the fleet probably started in southern Anatolia, maybe in Cilicia.
Yeah, yeah, I would say that that's correct. Because the three major contributors, as you're probably going to point out, are the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, and the Cilicians. And the Cilicians are the furthest north of any of those contributors.
Right, so they probably assembled at Cilicia and then moved up and around and then met the land force there. I guess we'd seen previously, and you may be getting into that, to cross the Hellespont, they built a pontoon bridge on top of boats, although probably not on top of the warships. They probably had open-hulled boats, but they had a lot of them to build a pontoon bridge for the land army going across the Hellespont. Then the fleet and the land army went in parallel all around the coast. The fleet did not come across, as opposed to Marathon. In Marathon, the fleet came across by way of the islands. But for this one, the fleet came with the land force down the coast. And that coast was mostly Persian dominated. There was Macedonia, Thessaly, Thrace, all of those were part of the Persian Empire or subject to it. And they came down the coast where there was, and apparently a bunch of ships were wrecked in a storm off the coast of Thessaly.
Yeah. If we remember from last time we spoke, we discussed how Xerxes built a canal through the peninsula at Mount Athos, specifically to avoid the windstorm that had destroyed the first set of ships that had come during Darius' period over the same distance.
That's right. If you see up at the top left of the Aegean Sea, they go through that first peninsula where he had built a canal specifically for the purposes, and then out and around the second two. I guess that first one was most susceptible to windstorms, and they had a bad experience with that. So they went through that first one and then around, but they were exposed. When you're far out like that, you're exposed. So they kept to land, close to land as far as possible so they could pull up if conditions got rough. When they got down to Euboea, then they turned inland and came inside of the channel at Euboea, stopping at Artemisium. And there was a small naval battle at Artemisium at the top of Euboea, which I guess was simultaneous with the land battle at Thermopylae, at the pass at Thermopylae.
Yeah, indeed it was.
And then when the Persians ultimately defeated the Greeks at Thermopylae, then the Greeks pulled back from Artemisium and pulled down around Euboea back to Athens and Salamis. And then the Persian fleet followed them. There's an outer line outside of Euboea where the Persian fleet apparently sent a partial fleet, about 200 ships perhaps, to go south around Euboea and then come in from the other end, perhaps trap the Greek fleet. But it's not clear whether that existed, and there was suggestion that they may have been destroyed in a storm, being highly exposed to the Aegean Sea there, but they don't seem to have played a significant role in any case. But then both fleets ended up coming south around that peninsula, back up to the Piraeus Athens area and the island and the Bay of Salamis.
Just a question,
Yes.
Ralph.
Yes, John.
It was a dumb question potentially, but did they have maps?
I guess as far as I know, they probably didn't. They of course, they had people who had been there, and they picked up, the Persian fleet picked up people all along the way, picked up boats, picked up soldiers, picked up sailors. So they had people from Thrace, from Macedonia, from Thessaly as they came. They probably had some beginning. Of course, they'd been to Marathon previously. They'd been this area. So I guess there's no evidence that they had portable drawings of the coastline. I've never seen any reference to that. I think they just made sure they had pilots who knew the area.
One of the main advisors to Xerxes was Demaratus, Spartan relative of the Spartan king, could have been. So he must have had intimate knowledge of the coast.
Yeah, they had spies and exiles and so on, so that they always had people who knew it. Yes?
I know that Phoenicians, they used stars to navigate. They're one of the first ones to use stars to navigate. So that might have been one of the navigation systems that they had.
That's correct. Now, I think in this case, they were always in sight of land, and they only sailed during the day. So they didn't need, for Marathon, when they were crossing the open water coming across, they probably needed some celestial navigation. But I think for the second invasion, they didn't.
I mean, the thing with Datis and you're talking about the second wave with Datis and Artaphernes, where they crossed over the Cycladic islands before they got to Athens. They were always only going within 1 day's boat ride to the next island. So you can think of it almost like the American island hopping when we fought in World War II. It was not this sort of like they started at Halicarnassus and just went straight across the Aegean and landed at Athens. They hit a number of pit stops along the way, especially Naxos.
Yeah, you're talking about when they were going to Marathon.
Yes.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, they came across island, but yeah, island hopping. So short distances between islands and waiting for good weather, presumably, to do it.
I think actually this puts us at exactly the point that that we started about talking about Salamis, no? Or are we talking more about the ships? Okay, well, yeah. Perfect.
Do you want to?
No, go for it.
Oh, okay.
I don't have the numbers.
Okay. Yeah, I compiled this all. So the Greek fleet supposedly, and these are numbers from Herodotus's histories, which is all about the Persian wars. So the Greek fleet, according to Herodotus, had 370 ships, about half of them from Athens, Corinth, quite a few from Corinth, from Aegina, the island south of Athens, some from Euboea. I've put, just for my own purposes, the Euboean fleet had from several city-states, Euboea, Megara, Argolid, which is Troezen, Epidauros, and Hermione. Some from the islands, a few from Sparta. Of course, Sparta was not a naval power. Athens was the naval power, and then a few others. So a total of 370 ships from about 15 different city-states. The Persian fleet, according to Herodotus, and Aeschylus in his play The Persians, I think, uses exactly the same number, 1,207. People suspect that this is grossly exaggerated, maybe 700. Also, Herodotus says that they started out from Asia Minor with 1,207, and they ended up at Salamis with 1,207. But they lost a few hundred along the way due to storms, and they picked up a few along the way. So the numbers are regarded as quite unreliable. Maybe 700 Persians to 370 Greeks. And these were the trireme warships, the battleships. As I guess Richard mentioned, the Phoenicians provided about, according to Herodotus, provided 300, the Egyptians 200, Cyprus 150, Cilicia 100, Ionia 100, the Asia Minor, Phrygia, Caria, Aeolia, Lycia, Pamphylia, which is southern Anatolia, Dora, and the Cyclades Islands. So yeah, none from Persia. Persia didn't have a navy, of course. So it was the Persian Empire, and these were all from the states, the conquered states of the Persian Empire. So the Phoenicians were the historical seafarers and traders, so they provided most of the ships, but they were part of the Persian Empire at this point, as was Egypt.
Right.
Now,
I mean, the other thing is that Persia didn't have any direct access to the Mediterranean, right? Because there's no canal. So even if they built ships off the coast of the Strait of Hormuz, they couldn't get anywhere.
Yeah. So they probably had some ships down at the Persian Gulf, but I haven't seen anything on that, and that was irrelevant to the Persian Wars. Now, Herodotus also says, in addition to the 1,200 warships, they also had about 3,000 pentaconters, other triremes, horse transports, and supply ships. Now, there's almost no information about these. It's the trireme warships that get all the attention. They get all the pictures, all the descriptions, all the attention, all the numbers. But there must have been, I think Herodotus was probably, the numbers are certainly unreliable, but there must have been a huge supply fleet. Now in Marathon in particular, they brought horses over on the boats. Now you can't fit a horse on a battle trireme. And horses don't do very well on sea voyages. Often they'll put them in slings or they'll have very special capacity. But they apparently, even for this one, the Persians had food supply ships, they had troop transports, they had horse supply ships. Probably a lot of the pentaconters, the single layer rowers with or without a deck, were supply ships. And as I say, Marathon was all supply ships. There was no naval battle at Marathon. It was all troops, horses, supplies brought in by ship, and then it was completely a land battle. 10 years earlier in 490 BC, and the first invasion, before this, the invasion leading to Salamis. Just again, pulling out the numbers from Herodotus, the Persian force had, and actually, I guess nobody thinks that these are real, but about 1,700,000 infantry, 500,000 sailors. Now, if you had 1,200 ships at 200 sailors per ship, that's 240,000 sailors, rowers, 240,000, well, sailors are rowers. There would be the 36,000 armed marine, they call them marines, the bowmen and spearsmen on the deck of the triremes. And then they had about 3,000 supply ships, let's call them pentaconters, 80 crew there, 50 rowers and 30 crew. That would be about 240,000. They had about 80,000 cavalry. They had 20,000 camel drivers and charioteers, apparently, according to Herodotus. Now that makes a total of 2.3 million troops in total. And then I guess it's thought that they may have had a similar number for these were the fighters and sailors. And then they may have had a similar number for the supply train, for the food supplies, the transports, various hangers-on and such, for 5 million people. And this would have required about 100,000 bushels of wheat per day just to feed them, basically. Maybe an exact, so I guess a lot of the scholars think that probably less than 1 million, maybe 700,000-800,000 might have been a better, anyhow, any other comments on that will be welcome. Now, in doing the historiography I spent some time looking through Herodotus. Herodotus is the primary source for this. This is the primary source for information. Not, as I say, there are some images. Aeschylus, his book, The Persians, is about specifically this war and particularly focusing on the Battle of Salamis. And Aeschylus is thought to have participated in the battle. So he was writing based on his own experience and observations. The battle was 480. He was writing in 470. So he 472 or 473. So he was writing about 8 years after the battle in which he had participated. But his is a play, which doesn't provide a lot of detail. Herodotus is much more detailed. And what I was interested in particularly in Herodotus, was when he talks about, now this was for Marathon. He said Darius sent heralds to his own tributary cities of the seacoast, commanding that ships of war and transports for horses be built. Now this was for the Marathon, where it was transport. But of course, yeah, Darius sent from Susa, from Persia, to the seacoast, to the coastal parts of the empire, telling them to build ships. In Cilicia, the ships and the transports for horses came up. This seems to have been the assembly point for the fleet. Having cast the horses into these and embarked the land army in the ship. Again, this is for Marathon. They sailed to Ionia with 600 triremes. In Eretrian territory, which was on Euboea, so having crossed the Aegean, they disembarked their horses and made preparation to attack their enemies. So this is then, it was a land battle from then on. When the Persians were defeated in the land battle at Marathon, they scrambled back, the survivors scrambled back as fast as they could for their boats, took off and headed home. After the defeat at Marathon, Darius, of course, Darius, the king who had lost at Marathon, decided he was going back. He wasn't going to let that be the final word. He sent messengers to all cities, charging each to provide much more than they had before provided of ships and horses and provision and vessels of transport. For this second invasion, Herodotus says the numbers of the Persian triremes was shown to be 1,207. There were fighting men of the Persians and Medes and Sakai on all the ships. So these were the archers and the spearmen on the deck. So the Persians provided many of the fighters on the ships. The best sailing ships were furnished by the Phoenicians. As for the ships of 30 and 50 oars and light galleys and great transports for horses, the sum of them altogether was shown to be 3,000. Again, the numbers are unreliable, but there was a huge fleet, support fleet or transport fleet, and this was talking about the second invasion, even though presumably the horses were part of the land army. But necessarily, the fighting fleet required a big support fleet. A question, and I guess I don't mean to preempt it, but a question was, what was the significance of the victory at Salamis? The victory at Salamis is usually put as being the turning point of basically the defeat of the Persians in the second invasion. Now, it's not obvious why that would be true. The Persians wanted to conquer Greece. Now, you can't conquer, that is to conquer the land. Now, you can't conquer Greece. You can't occupy territory with a naval trireme. A naval trireme is strictly a naval battleship. So why was the Persian fleet so essential to it? And once they lost the Battle of Salamis, Xerxes gave up and took off home. He got on board one of the surviving ships and headed home. They left some troops, but those troops were fairly quickly defeated, as we'll see, and then they headed home. So Salamis, was probably, I guess it was a turning point here. Salamis, I think, was the greatest naval engagement up until this point. There were some subsequent ones in the Punic War and the Roman, say, the Battle of Actium, but this was the big naval battle up until this point and for the next couple of centuries. So what did a naval battle mean at this point? There are a couple of clues in Herodotus. When the Persians in Herodotus, according to Herodotus, are planning the second invasion, Artabanes, who's Xerxes' uncle and the brother of Darius, Xerxes' father, Artabanes, Xerxes says he wants to attack them. I think partly his father failed, so he's going to do what his father didn't do. Artabanes is not convinced that this is that launching this huge expedition against the Greeks is a good idea. And he says, look, if the Greeks attack with their ships and prevail in a sea fight, and then sail to the Hellespont and break your bridge, that, O king, is the hour of peril. So it wasn't, so the sea fight, according to this, was not really about just who's going to win this sea fight. It was about for control of the seas. And if the Greeks had control of the seas, then they could sail north and destroy the pontoon bridge over the Hellespont. That would strand the entire Persian army, or what was left of it, in European Greece, and would then be very much dangerous. So they had to, the Persian army had to get back to Asia over the Hellespont Bridge, which was susceptible to naval disruption. Subsequently, Herodotus reports, I cannot perceive, and this is Herodotus speaking, I cannot perceive what advantages could accrue from the walls built across the isthmus while the king, Xerxes, was master of the seas. In other words, by the time of Salamis, the Persian army had conquered all of Greece north of Corinth. They'd conquered Athens. Athens had been evacuated. And so what remained, Athens had been destroyed. So what remained was for the Persians to march and conquer Sparta, basically. Conquer the
Ralph, we're going to sort of get into that a little bit after when we talk about the Battle of Salamis. So I was going to, because I can see that you have other pictures of some of the supply ships. That might be interesting to talk about, but otherwise we should probably continue with the main presentation.
Okay, so Salamis was about control of the sea, and control of the sea was partly about what the strategic importance of the isthmus.
Can I ask a question about the ships themselves?
Yeah.
Homer constantly talks about the black-hulled ships.
Yes.
Specifically talks about covering their entire hull with pitch and bitumen in order to keep them watertight.
Correct.
So in fact, these ships would not have looked like wood at all. They would have looked like black tar.
Yes, below the water, at least below the water line. That's correct. Let's see, do these other pictures look like that? No, so this modern reconstruction is wood, you're right. So that's not like...
It looks like a piece of furniture, but not something that's designed to deal with the real conditions of sailing in the Mediterranean.
That's right. So this is a picture of the Greek pentaconter, which is probably what was used for Homer at the Battle of Troy. Now this is black.
And also, let's not talk about Homer in the Battle of Troy. Let's talk about Homer in his actual context, which would be in the 700s BC.
Okay, yes, I think probably that's true. Again, I guess the images don't show this. There are some references to that. But yes, I think they probably were tarred at least up to the water line and probably a bit above. But as I said, I'm not sure the evidence is very clear on that. Okay, this is a hello? Yes, John?
Oh, John here. Yeah, there's always been doubt about Homer's color vocabulary too. Are we sure that black means black?
I think that's, yeah, well, I think the reference to tar, I mean, tar would normally be black, so using tar, or I guess pitch is not necessary. I guess pitch can be clear. So yeah, maybe that's a reasonable point. But I guess you're right. Homer says black, and I guess the assumption has been that's been tar. But as you say, I don't think that's clearly documented. So this is just a picture of a trireme in a storm, obviously not realistically, but this would have been a very dangerous maneuver for a trireme. The triremes were not all that strong. They were light, they were built for speed. If you get them up this way, they could even break in two, because you've got a lot of weight, particularly at the back, you've got a lot of weight up out of the water. And they weren't designed. They're designed for relatively flat water where the entire ship is in the water. They're not designed for surfing the waves. This shows the layout of the oars, the staggered, the outrigger at the top with a raised bench, a lower seat at the top layer with a second oar, and then a lower seat on a lower level for the bottom oar. And so those three oars are very close together, need to be closely coordinated. You see the scale at the bottom, that's 1 meter. So those oars are within a foot of each other, 30 centimeters or something like that. Now the ship, so the ship is about let's say 6 meters wide. So half of the ship is about 3 meters. The oars stand out another 3 meters. The primary war tactic was ramming, but also if the ship could get close to another ship, pull in their oars and run along the other ship while the ship had its oars out, they could snap off all the oars, and that would incapacitate the other ship. So that was another tactic that was used. This is a picture of the Pentaconner, which were the supply ships. They probably more commonly used sail. They had been used as warships, and this one does have that ramming beak at the front. Let's see, they had various, so pentaconters, biremes, triremes. Now later they talk about quadriremes, quinquiremes, 6, 12s, and 16s. Now, it's not clear, there are no diagrams or descriptions, but clearly I think the evidence is that they never had more than 3 banks of rows. So these numbers refer to the number of rowers, and you would get multiple rowers to an oar, 2, 3, up to 8 rowers on an oar. Then in addition to they have cargo ships or supply ships. The one on the left is actually is a reconstruction from a shipwreck off Cyprus, a Greek ship off Cyprus from about 350 BC. So not that much long, not too far after. They probably had fairly similar ships around the time of the Persian Wars. Then there's a later Roman cargo ship, somewhat bigger. And these were mostly sailing ships with rudders. Not so much steering, so they were longer distance, they were slower, and these were bigger, stronger. They could do night sailing and offshore sailing. This was late 200 BC. Then they started getting into larger cargo ships. Okay, and then we get to the. So I'll turn it over to Richard and Lisa.
Perfect.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
Wait, before we get rid of this map, I actually just want to point it out. You can see there, and I think Ralph was going to allude to it, that this is the Isthmus of Corinth. Right. So you can see in the upper right-hand side, north is up, right? You can see in the upper right-hand side the main part of Greece, which is Attica, right? And then you can see that the connection to the Peloponnesos is this thin isthmus. Of course, the reason why it's sort of more brownish, there is a line, is because it's a canal today. But at that point, it was still a functional isthmus. And this would be the entry into Sparta, into the rest of the Greek area. And so similar to Thermopylae, you had this constraining strait, which would prevent, this constraining isthmus that would prevent the Persians from marshaling their huge force and overwhelming the Greek defenders. So after Athens fell, and we're going to discuss that, this becomes the point where the Greeks make their next stand, similar to Thermopylae. Okay, now we can switch, I think.
Okay,
Richard,
great.
Richard, I mean, do you know the actual distance there? I mean, I've been there, and it's not a tiny place.
No, it's not a tiny place.
I mean, you could fit a sizable force along there. It's absolutely not like a single defile like Thermopylae. It's broad enough, so you could have a huge force lined up in line there.
Yeah, no, it's a few miles wide. No, but the thing
that
is that
means there's no practical limit on the size of the force that could fight there.
Not exactly. Like, the thing is that the Persians did take up a large amount of area. Perhaps it wasn't a mile wide, but the thing is that the Greeks were arranging themselves at that position. They knew that that was the best place for them to defend themselves because of the narrowness of that area, relatively speaking.
Also, even in a 10-mile, you can build a strongly fortified wall, which the Greeks did. So
absolutely, absolutely. All I'm saying is that it's a misnomer to compare that to Thermopylae.
Yes,
it was not Thermopylae at all, where you could have a few hundred yards that you could defend.
You couldn't defend it with 300.
No, yeah. Well, remember, it's 7,000, right? Because that was Lisa's presentation last
time. And that's
not
enough either.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not. Anyway, Lisa.
Yeah, Ralph, if you could stop sharing, I'll go ahead and take over sharing. Excellent, thank you. All right, so where are we going?
It was really informative.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, it was great. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and just make sure that I am in presentation mode. So hold on for 1 second, folks.
You can press F5. I'll do it.
Okay, but I also have to get my cheat. I have to see the presenter view so I can cheat, right?
Aha.
Okay. Aha, yes. So Battle of Salamis. And again, thanks, Ralph. That was super, super helpful for us to understand kind of what the capabilities were and what people were using in terms of technologies at the time. So what I'm going to do is a really quick lightning recap from the past couple of presentations. The Greeks have won Marathon. They have lost Thermopylae. The naval battle that was taking place in parallel to Thermopylae at Artemisium, that ended kind of in a draw. Themistocles, the naval commander, withdraws after learning that Thermopylae has been lost, and he is going to withdraw his fleet down to Salamis here. He does that really under cover of night and uses, I guess, smoke as well, so that it causes some confusion for the Persians. Remember too, the last time that we got together, we spoke of the decree of Themistocles, or the Trojan decree, which is somewhat contested, that in advance of Thermopylae, actually Themistocles had made the argument that Athens needed to be abandoned. Largely abandoned, and there were just a few people that remained on the Acropolis to guard the treasury, as well as the temples that are there. And then the last thing I'll point out is, remember, in advance we spoke about how much investment Themistocles made in making sure that the silver strike at a nearby mine, all of those funds were actually channeled into the building of a significant Athenian navy. So we are here in the Salamis channel, and we will have better images of what that actually looks like. But I wanted to just point it out here because it gives us a little bit of kind of what we're dealing with here. Is that it's extremely narrow and shallow. The advantage that the Persians had in terms of numbers, which Ralph touched on, isn't going to do much good here because, again, it's so narrow and shallow. The Greek trireme is lighter and more maneuverable. And the reason I put kind of like a caveat there is because in some of the references that I was looking into, there was discussion about the Greeks really focused on their kind of like, you know, not bare bones, but they had their rowers and then they had the rest of the crew to round it out. They had very few like land force fighters on the actual triremes. When I was reading about what the Phoenicians and others amongst the Persian allied navy did was they actually had large groups of land forces on their triremes, which caused them to be more top heavy and even more unstable. So that's why I put that as kind of a caveat here. So the advantage Themistocles believes is to the Greeks' advantage, lighter, smaller fleet, and Xerxes does not want to go into this channel. This is what Salamis looks like, where the battle actually took place, looks like today. So if you can see here, these are ships, maybe they're cargo ships, large ships, but there is not a lot of space. If you could just visualize those big things that Ralph was showing us, those images, and you know, just imagine a lot of those being in these straits. Boy, that would, to me, that seems like it would be a recipe for a lot of potential chaos, which we will get into.
So if we go to the next slide, we'll see what's going on. Yeah.
Do you see the positioning here? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So, yep. So this is kind of the way that the ships are positioned. In blue and the white here is the Greeks, the way that they position themselves. In the red here is the way that the Persian ally navy has set themselves up.
Oh, which side selected Salamis? Was it, did they meet by chance?
No, actually, Themistocles, through underhanded means, managed to convince the Persians that this would be a right area to attack. This was actually a hugely contentious issue in the Persians, and I'm going to sort of discuss this. So, coming out of Thermopylae with their victory, the Persians moved into Boeotia, and from Boeotia into Attica. So they were able to take the central area of mainland Greece. And he ordered that any of the cities that had contributed to the resistance at Thermopylae be razed to the ground, which included Thespia and Plataea, right? Because these were two of the cities that had donated soldiers to the resistance at Thermopylae. And any of the cities that had not resisted at Thermopylae, Xerxes was willing to give them quarter as long as they submitted to the Persian Empire, earth and water, just like everywhere else, and they accepted that. Now, most of the Athenians took the orders to retreat to Salamis when Attica was falling, and so Athens was taken by the Persian army in 480 BC, and there were Athenians who did resist, and they resisted, especially in the Acropolis area. You can see in the map how the Acropolis is elevated from the rest of the area, and how there's a sort of wall that goes around it. This was the area that the Athenians primarily defended against the Persians, as opposed to defending the main gates of the city. And according to the Greeks, right, because the Persians didn't write down much of this, the Persians were able to scale the unscalable. They were able to do the undoable. It was sort of a mark of how powerful the Persians were that they were able to achieve this kind of victory. Now, one of the other things is that the Athenian treasury was looted. So this was a particularly the Persians wanted to make sure that all of the wealth of Athens was taken, and the Athenians would never consider again this kind of attack against Persia. You remember that the entire reason for all of this violence started with the Athenian sacking of Sardis in the Ionian revolt. And so the Persians saw their coming to Athens and their destruction of Athens, including the destruction of several major temples in the Athenian treasury, as retribution for what the Athenians had done to them previously. So the entire city of Athens was accordingly torched, and the Acropolis was raised. It was rebuilt later, but it was raised at this point. And the old Parthenon and the old Temple of Athena were both destroyed by the Persians. So if we move into the next slide, you can sort of see some of the pictures of what's called the Perserschut, which is the rubble that was left by the Persians when they destroyed Athens. The reason it has this German name is because it was German archaeologists, primarily in the 19th century, who excavated this layer.
And one thing that I'll just interject here, Richard, is that there has been a little bit of a discussion or discourse around when Athens was actually burned. I guess there's some discrepancies in the ancient texts. So I don't know if we have decided on it was before or after Salamis. So I'm not 100% sure, but one of the references that I had used, Peter Green's Greco-Persian Wars, said that when the fleet was at Salamis, as well as like the old men that had been evacuated to Salamis prior to Athens being attacked, saw smoke rising from Athens, and it was just devastating to them.
Right. No, definitely. In fact, it was after the Persians thoroughly defeated Athens. Whether or not they torched it at that moment is questionable, but the Persian defeat of Athens led to Xerxes assembling his commanders to determine what would be the next best way to attack the Athenians, because the Athenians had, as we point out, retreated to Salamis. So Xerxes assembled his naval commanders, and among them was Artemisia. We've talked about Artemisia before. She fought very well at the Battle of Artemisium, no relation. She was a queen of an Ionian city-state of Halicarnassus.
Carian.
Sorry?
Halicarnassus was Carian. Caria. It's the south of Ionia.
Yeah, it was an Ionian city.
Yeah, I've seen her referred to as both the Queen of Halicarnassus and the Queen of Caria. I gather those are synonymous.
Yes. So anyway, so she was the queen of this territory, and she had 5 ships under her command, built by Ionian Greeks, and which fought under the Persian banner, because the Persians had this sort of diverse group of peoples fighting for them. And so even though the majority of the ships, as we pointed out under Ralph's presentation, were from Phoenicia, Egypt, Cilicia, and Cyprus, you had ships that were fighting from other regions, and so she was responsible for these 5. In the Battle of Artemisium, she proved how effective she was, and when Xerxes was considering a naval assault on Salamis, she argued very strongly against it, saying that the Greeks had a definitive advantage at sea that the Persians could not replicate. And the way she phrased it to him was that it would be like women fighting against men, which, of course, coming from the mouth of a woman, literally shows the kind of sexism that she needed to portray at this point, even though she was seen as a viable commander. The men, the male generals disagreed and thought that the Persians should pursue into the Salamis area, but Xerxes overruled them at first, saying that he treasured Artemisia's opinion because of her abilities as a naval fighter. However, Themistocles sent an agent into the Persian ranks, and this agent claimed that the Athenians were fleeing, that they were confused and disoriented, and that this would be the right time to strike. The other generals under Xerxes were the ones who argued that the invasion of Salamis would be a go, that the Persians had more ships, and therefore they would be able to win the victory. And so Xerxes finally decided to agree with them, and we can see that Artemisia doesn't have the kind of pull to really stop this battle from taking place.
Richard, where are you getting? What is the source for some of these stories that you're recounting? Like
most of the stories of Artemisia actually come from Herodotus, because Herodotus, as a person who grew up in Halicarnassus, saw her as this sort of heroine idol kind of a person, and wrote about her. From the Persian side, we actually don't have much in the way of recording specifically what Xerxes was thinking and his war councils. From modern Persian scholarship, the idea that this is correct is relatively unchallenged. It's not to say that they think that there's something that they affirmatively agree with it. They just don't see any reason to refute it.
Right, right. And I don't disagree with it either. I was just wondering what was the source, because these are kind of highly specific stories from, you know, over 2,000 years ago. So.
Yeah, no, this is Herodotus.
Okay.
The interesting aspect of it, Richard, I just want to give a quick note. They don't know if Themistocles would have actually betrayed them, because Themistocles would have had no choice to betray them if he would have got trapped. So it was really unknown, the fact that, because we know, I mean, I don't know if you guys are going to talk about it, but he did essentially end up in Persian court at the end, you know, so that's the aspect of it. So
yeah, but
we don't know.
That was later. That was
yeah, but still,
war.
what I'm saying is that he could have played a double agent or may not be. So we don't know.
No,
And we'll talk a little bit about that, guys.
Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, we will touch on that.
Sorry.
No,
All right,
all good. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and move on. I do think, though, that about that Athens being burned, though, it wasn't only that the treasury was looted, but I believe that, you know, of people that were remaining, it included priests and priestesses who had, some of whom had fled into, locked themselves up in one of the temples, which was burned to the ground. And so that was a real desecration and a real, like, stab to the heart, I guess, for the Greeks. And just knowing that was just fueled like rage.
Yeah, no, and this was actually a very unusual tactic for the Persians. The Persians generally respected the religious sites of the places that they conquered, even if they were venerating gods other than Ahura Mazda. The fact that Xerxes had all of these places torched really shows the anger that was burning in the Persians' hearts over the way the Athenians had treated them previously.
At Sardis, primarily.
Yeah, at Sardis primarily.
Yep.
Yeah, and how about Marathon? I mean, you know,
Marathon was a defeat.
Marathon was the great humiliation that the Persians needed to avenge.
Absolutely, but there wasn't as much of a religious overtone to it as at Sardis, I think.
I would second what Lisa said, but I'd say also the defeat at Marathon was, from the Persian perspective, a localized defeat. The amount of soldiers that the Persians had placed at Marathon was an expeditionary force. The intent was to conquer. It wasn't a joke, but the comparison of the size of the troop movements under Xerxes and under Darius is a huge difference. We're talking orders of magnitude more soldiers under Xerxes. That was a war where they intended to really conquer the territory. Darius thought that he could subdue it with this smaller amount of soldiers. So the fact that he couldn't do it, it was an annoyance, and definitely he wanted to make sure that the Greeks paid for it. But it wasn't the primary driver.
Just want to say, I think it was more than an annoyance. I think that to great king of Persia, part of their ideology was that every great king had to expand Persian territory. This was an unheard of defeat for a Persian royal army. And I think that it was a deep humiliation that
the Persian army had been defeated several times before. The Persian army had, Cyrus was killed by the Hephthalites. And Cyrus was in the Persians' eyes the best of the Persian conquerors. So the idea that the Persians were some undefeatable Alexander the Great kind of thing, that wasn't the perception. The perception was that all the world should open themselves to the Persians, but the Persians weren't going to win every battle.
It's Ava. Can I ask a little quick question? Was this the first time, it can't be, that they attacked religious sites?
I don't know if the Persians attacked religious sites elsewhere.
I mean, in civilizations, you know, you just sort of said they didn't attack, but was that part of the culture? Never to attack?
Generally, unless the religious authorities of a region rebelled against the Persians, the religious authorities specifically, they didn't target religious sites. And in fact, it's very famous. Yeah, exactly. They were religiously tolerant. So most of the religious structures, for example, in Egypt, were preserved. Most of the structures in Armenia were preserved. most of the structures in Anatolia were preserved. In fact, many of them were financially supported by the Persians once the conquest had finished. There are a couple examples of other religious sites that were burned to the ground. The one that comes to my mind is the Babylonian revolt of 484, so also under Xerxes, very similar time period. But this was because there was a religious revolt led by the priests in Babylonia, and so their temples were burned down to the ground by Xerxes. But that was specifically when the religion revolted against the Persians. Otherwise, they didn't target religious sites as a general policy.
Okay. All right, I'm going to keep us moving along if I could here, because we got still quite a bit to get through. So I want to just kind of highlight something that I think is really important to understand is that, and we have talked about it in the past, but amongst the Greek city-states that are uniting under this Hellenic League, there is still disagreement and squabbling over the strategy. So there was a large contingent, actually the majority of folks who were arguing for a retreat from Salamis and actually a repositioning at the Isthmus of Corinth that we had looked at on the last slide of Ralph's presentation. And their thinking was, you know what, we don't believe that a victory is going to be possible. The Persians still outnumber us. If we move all of our forces down to the isthmus, we're at least closer to our homelands for the Peloponnesians that are a comprising part of this force. And they simply were arguing continuously with the position that had been taken by Themistocles, which was, our best advantage is to inflict a defeat at Salamis for the reasons I spoke of a couple of slides back. He's thinking this is going to prevent the Persians from moving even further south. He reminds them of what sacrifice the Athenians had done by actually abandoning and giving over their city to invasion and decimation by the Persians. And his final kind of like, you know, card that he played was, hey, if you guys are going to, you know, do that, retreat to the isthmus, then we're going to pull the Athenian navy out and we're going to go someplace that's going to welcome us, which meant outside of Greece. You know, in the end, Eurybiades, who is the actual Hellenic League's admiral for the fleet, he sides with Themistocles and sees the wisdom in a Salamis position and all. There is, even though there is a decision to stay at Salamis, there is still this contingent of Peloponnesians that are erecting a wooden wall across the isthmus, and they are also doing destruction to a road or a path that led the main path that connected Megara with the Peloponnesians, the Corinth.
As we discussed, sort of on the Persian side, Artemisia I of Caria, of Halicarnassus, she was the main voice in dissent, not going into Salamis, but she was overruled because of the increasing. Because of the fact that there were other admirals in the navy who supported going into Salamis, who thought that it would be an easy victory, and the false agent from Themistocles. So Xerxes himself didn't go into the water. He actually stayed on the mountain overlooking the area. It's Mount Aigaleo, and he actually watched the battle from that land point. That's how close this battle was to the shoreline, that he could identify boats. And so the sort of hope was that the strength and size of the Persian fleet coming into the Gulf of Salamis would be so frightening to the Greeks, who were already, according to this agent, were already so disoriented that they would leave the Gulf and be in the more open water, where the size of the Persian navy could really wreak an advantage. So you can actually see, this is one of the few paintings of Artemisia, and it's obviously not historically accurate, but that's sort of the image we gave.
Very Wagnerian, Richard. Richard, I wanted to ask you, it seems like it's an interesting theme that's emerging here, all the way from Marathon, which is that the Persians did have this I'm hearing it, kind of a grandiose shock and awe strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about this actually last time. Xerxes, as opposed to Darius, was not raised as a military commander. He was raised in the court. And so he thought that he would defeat the Greeks by scaring them and cowing them into defeat, as opposed to actually fighting them into defeat. So he doesn't actually seem to think that strategically, as compared to the Greeks who really do. At the beginning of the fight, of course, he builds the bridge across the Hellespont, which is actually not necessary for getting the troops across the Hellespont. Darius had done it numerous times, and what he did is that he had boats ferry people from one side of the Hellespont to the other. The thing is that Xerxes wanted to show his power to shape the earth, and so he built this bridge. And when the bridge fell the first time, as we pointed out last time, he actually had his soldiers lash the sea for being so insolent as to defy him. You have this sort of sense from, especially Xerxes, but from the Persians in general, that they are sort of the bringers of this civilization, and therefore the world should bend to them in this way. And so it definitely has this sort of shock and awe nature to it.
Just a little note I just wanted to say about the Carians. The Carians, the territory of Caria, were occupied by Dorian Greeks versus Ionians, who were north of them. You know, so
Okay.
it was different type of, but the Carians also ethnic group.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, no, okay, I thought they were Ionians, but they were definitely Greeks under the service of the Persians. And Artemisia's loyalty to Persia was never doubted, at least by the Persian leadership. Okay, yeah, that's the Persian War Council.
Okay.
So
Go
go
ahead, Richard.
No, I mean it's pretty straightforward. So yeah, go ahead. Okay, so Xerxes, as we saw from the map, blocked the southern part of the strait in order to sort of fence the Greeks in for a bit, and then withdrew in order to tempt the Greeks into evacuating. This move of going into the straits was actually very deleterious to the Persian ships, because the size of the Persian ships and the number of them forced them into very close quarters, and it meant that the Persian ships were more likely to ram into each other than to ram into the Greeks. This was and Artemisia, this queen that we've been following so far, she actually manages to free herself by ramming another Persian ship into the water. Xerxes, who's watching the battle, actually believes that she's rammed a Greek ship, and so doesn't punish her for it. But the ship that Artemisia rams has 0 survivors, although she manages to get her boat out of this cavalcade of destruction that starts happening.
Well, presumably,
and if I may add,
yeah, go ahead.
She actually rammed that Persian ship because she was pursued by a Greek TRIREME, and she was really very desperate to get out.
Absolutely,
she was actually rewarded for this.
But the famous quote from Xerxes, I don't know if you're going to get to that, is go ahead, say it.
Yeah. We will get to it. It will be a cliffhanger.
Okay.
Right.
But one thing I think is important to understand too is that the Greeks were very upset that there was this woman first that was leading command of the ships, and specifically that she was leading command against the Greeks, and so she had like a very high price on her head. And so there was reward if the Greeks were able to like destroy her ship. I don't know if it was, a dead or alive kind of a thing for the reward, but definitely she was somebody that the Greeks really wanted to seek revenge on. Right.
Absolutely.
I think an addition here is that not only about the positioning that Richard has talked about, but also there is a contingent of about 400 land force that are put onto this little island off of Salamis. And we'll see a map of it shortly. And they were there with with their battle gear in order to cut down any Greeks that survived ramming of their ships that swam to shore. And they were there just to make sure that anybody that got onto shore was cut down. People did already make reference to this about Themistocles, and what's going on here is that, Themistocles, the Council of War is called yet again. He's getting really tired of hearing the Greeks fight amongst themselves and question his positioning at Salamis. The Peloponnesians want to retreat to the Corinthian isthmus again. He actually withdraws from this council of war. He's had enough, and he sends a message to Xerxes. And so this is where I think that people start to question what was his motivation. Is it that he is really the trickster, or is he actually kind of paving the way for what will become his future, which is an alliance with the Persians? He actually goes and lives in Persian territories. This is a quote from Themistocles. I call him the trickster, and he says to Xerxes, "I'm on the king's side," meaning Xerxes, "and prefer that your affairs prevail, not the Hellenes." This is a statue of Themistocles at Piraeus. So we did go ahead and touch on a bit on this. So Richard, at any time, please interject. But, why, if Xerxes knows that his advantage is in open water, does he actually enter the straits? So he's well aware that there's dissension among the Greeks. He got the message from Themistocles and feels that, hey, their key naval commander is basically resigned to a defeat. The Corinthian fleet, there is talk that it actually peeled off from the formation that the rest of the fleet had put into position to defend Salamis. Xerxes sees that the Corinthian fleet has left, so part of the alliance is broken already. There are, impending storms. While Salamis Channel is more protected, there still can be winds that whip through there. So there was concern about any potential storms that had already wreaked havoc on his navy previously. And then he was concerned that there may be more reinforcements that come up from the Peloponnese. So there's dissension. Maybe there's going to be reinforcements if that dissension is not true. So he decides to go ahead and act. This is the positioning that's taking place here in the actual straits. You can again see that it's very, very narrow. Themistocles is kind of on the more north western part, and Eurybiades is down more to the south here. And you can see basically the Persian alliance coming into the straits and lining up. So you've got the Phoenicians, you've got Ionians, Cypriots, and Cilicians, as well as Egyptians. The island that I referenced, where there was 400 that were sent to kind of from the Persians to basically cut down anybody that swam ashore, is this one here, Satalia. And the Greeks basically kind of hang out, and they don't make any kind of an offensive move. And part of the reason is they want to lure the Persians in even closer and closer. And secondly, there was a wind that they knew would start to come up in the channel that would prove to be advantageous to their positioning. And so they were waiting for that to get a little added edge to their being able to row and ram with more force with some wind support. Here's now kind of the battle. So the Persians have entered into the channel. I mentioned that they had more infantry on their decks in the space that they had. That made them more top heavy. So any kind of disturbances in the water or with the wind is going to cause them to be unstable. The Greek strategy is really to kind of take a U formation and try and kind of encircle or pinch the Persians. The first attack, the Greek ship rams a Phoenician ship or trireme, and actually takes out the Phoenician commander Ariabines. I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Yeah,
Sorry?
Ariabignes.
Thank you, what Richard said. And they actually take out the main commander for the Phoenicians, which is devastating to the Phoenician fleet. About this time, there is wind that's starting to enter into the channel, and you know there's evidence that there was a lot of destabilizing of the Phoenician triremes. And for the Greeks who actually had their ships sunk and all, Greeks were water people and all. And so they were very good at swimming, whereas any of the land troops that were Persian in nature on any of those ships that are in the channel fighting for the Persians, they were land people, they weren't swimmers. So a lot of them drowned, whereas that wasn't so true on the Greek side. What was to their advantage, if you just recall the images that Ralph presented, were their battering rams, those bronze kind of right at the surface of the water and right under the water that they used to actually ram into the ships. As the Greeks are ramming into the ships from the Phoenician side and as well as the Ionian Greeks, any kind of maneuvering that the Phoenicians are trying to do, they're actually getting into each other's ways. So it's almost like there's a domino effect, and they're ramming into each other. So it causes total chaos. I think we touched on this last time, just briefly, that there was suspicion that some of the Ionians, or not some of that, but the Ionians that are fighting on behalf of Xerxes may start to defeat over to the Greek side. There was a breadcrumb of pleas, I think, engraved on rocks under Themistocles' guidance, basically saying to the Ionians fighting for the Persians, hey, come back, fight for your country. You don't want to fight for the Persians anymore. And what this ends up doing is it really sows doubt in some of the Persians' minds. You know, are they going to defect? Are they really going to fight as best that they possibly can against people that are Greek like them? And there's a time when the Phoenicians have started to get rammed by the Greeks, and some of their vessels run aground at the site of where Xerxes is set up, overlooking the channel and seeing everything that's happening. And the Phoenicians blame not themselves, but the Ionians. They say, hey, the Ionians just aren't fighting very, very well. They're not giving us any support. They're starting to defect. And Xerxes is like, you know what? I've seen actually what's going on in this channel here, and the Ionians are fighting really bravely. He actually just decides to go ahead and behead the Phoenicians, which is probably not the smartest move, since that's, you know, really his main naval commanders are the Phoenicians. They're really superior navy people.
May I also add that Themistocles, it was his practice even after the Battle of Artemisium. He left those engravings all the way down to Salamis. So he already created a suspicion that because he asked the Ionians, and that's according to Herodotus, either not to fight their brothers, or if you fight, don't fight in full force. So he created suspicion already. So the Ionians were not trusted even before the battle started, because all of those engravings were on a way from Artemisium to Salamis.
Great, thanks for that, Greg. So here's that cliffhanger I was talking about that I think Zach referenced. The quote that's attributed to Xerxes about when referring to Artemisia, Queen Artemisia, is that my men have become women and my women men. And we've already talked a lot about her, so I'm going to go ahead and move us on here. So, you know, the question becomes, are we done here? Because the Greeks have inflicted great damage upon the Persian navy. The battle will continue until the night. The Greeks actually fight until the night and then decide to retreat and basically prepare for a second day of engagement, which meant, you know, getting rest, fixing their ships, making sure that they're ready for the next day, getting fueled up with food and all that good stuff like that. But what ends up happening is that the Persians slip away in the middle in the night. It is, sorry?
Yeah, just to go back a bit, this idea of getting rest at night. Yeah, the rowing these ships is very hard work. You don't do it 24 hours a day. Yeah, an 8-hour day or something is a long day. Now, as part of this deception at the beginning, Themistocles sent this spy or this double agent to the Persians, saying some of the Peloponnesians want to get rid of, want to take off and go home. They're going to try and break out during the night. So Xerxes, so the Persians sent their triremes, their battleships, to patrol the exit to the straits all night long before the main battle. So so those rowers had been out rowing around all night long with the battle about to start in the morning.
And
Great
I'd
point,
like
Ralph.
may I expand a little bit with what Ralph was saying, because this is a very important point, why Persians eventually decided to engage, because they were very reluctant to go into the strait. They understood the disadvantage. You know, I mean, part of it, development, what Ralph was saying, that Themistocles sent this fake note that he's on the king's side, and that the Greeks are scared and want to escape from the other side. So, not only that they patrol, but that convinced them to engage the next day. But also there is a play there, and that also comes besides from Herodotus, from Plutarch, because he writes the lives of Themistocles and Aristides. These are the two competitors who actually, by the way, both commanded their respective tribes at the Battle of Marathon at that weakened center. You know, they were both commander of the tribes. So two sectors of the center that were weakened were commanded by Aristides and Themistocles. So they were competing for a long time. As a result, Aristides was ostracized. But before the battle they were recalled. Aristides was recalled along with another general, Xanthippus, who was actually father of Pericles. What's also interesting, Aristides was at the island of Aegina, or Aegina, which is the south of, and he saw that the Persians sent the patrol on the other side of Salamis to cut off the escape. And he sent a message to Themistocles. This is a cooperation despite of ostracism, that Persians are cutting you off on the other side. And actually, during the battle, he came over and he was given a command of the infantry, and he destroyed that military force that was Persian put on that small island there. I forgot the name of it. He actually landed there with the Greek force and destroyed those Persians that were landed there. So these are just part of it to this battle that were happening. Just wanted to add a little bit.
Yeah.
Of,
no. Thank you, Greg and Ralph, for that information. The end result is that there's a victory for the Greeks. They awake to no Persians on what they thought was going to be day 2 of an engagement. At the end, there was 200 Persian ships that are estimated to have been lost, compared to 40 Greek ships that were lost. So the next thing that I wanted to talk a bit about, and maybe Richard, if you want to take this.
Yeah.
About the
Yeah,
Persian
of course.
division.
So the Persians had to sort of reevaluate where they were, and so one of their major concerns was that if they wanted to continue this, they would need to continue a land invasion down into the Peloponnesos, and that would require all the supply ships that Ralph was discussing earlier, in order to maintain this kind of large army size. And with the defeat at Salamis, it wasn't clear that that kind of consistent supply line chain could be maintained. In addition, there could be problems elsewhere in the empire that Xerxes would need to deal with. So he couldn't have the full weight of the Persian Empire sitting on Greek soil, possibly not able to move forward. And so Artemisia comes up with a brilliant idea. She basically says that, where was it? She basically says, there's a really good way to do this. Leave Mardonius behind with about 300,000 troops to mop up the Greeks, and then here's what happens. If Mardonius wins, all glory goes to Xerxes. If Mardonius loses, all shame goes to Mardonius. So Xerxes wins either way, and so Xerxes takes this advice and moves back into Thrace with his army. While the pontoon bridges had been destroyed, Xerxes did manage to get most of his soldiers over the Hellespont by ferrying them.
Richard, just to follow up on the aftermath, because this isn't clear to me. I've just seen hints of this. Yeah, there are the supply ships. The Persians needed the supply ships, but also had the Persians prevailed and had they destroyed the Greek fleet and had control of all these waters, they could have transported the land army from Athens over to the Peloponnesus south of Corinth. They could have simply bypassed the defensive line at Corinth. And I think that defensive line at Corinth was fairly critical. And Herodotus says this, if they could, so the triremes or the supply ships could also have served as troop transport ships across the water to south of Corinth.
Right. No, that's definitely a key aspect, because they knew that they would have to fight a land battle if they were to stay in Greece.
And one thing I'll just add, which I think is important to point out, is that when Themistocles threatens during one of the numerous council of wars that the Greeks held to pull the Athenian navy out, the folks from the Peloponnese knew very well that what Ralph has just described is a distinct possibility, that land troops could be ferried through, and avoiding the peninsula altogether, or that pass altogether, that isthmus. So they knew very well that they were at a great disadvantage because of not having any kind of Athenian support if it came to that.
Right. And of course, the other main thing is that Xerxes had come. His primary objective had been to cow Athens. The second one was to conquer Greece. And he had achieved the first objective, and most of the Greek city-states were north of Attica. And so he'd gotten most of the Greek peninsula under his control. So from his perspective, while it wasn't a complete victory like he had wanted, it was a good enough of a victory, and he could entrust the rest of it to Mardonius.
So Richard, are you saying that when he went on the retreat up through the, up north again, he was retaining control of all those regions?
Yeah, most of the regions of like, for example, Thessaly or Macedonia, the upper parts of Boeotia, those parts remained part of the Persian Empire until the Greek counteroffensive, which we're going to talk about a little bit, but it was something that Xerxes definitely did not foresee. His sort of expectation was that Mardonius would put down any further Greek resistance. Maybe he would win, maybe he wouldn't win. It wouldn't really matter. The Greeks would be neutralized as a threat permanently. They would just be gone. That's not what happened, but that was sort of his thought pattern. And Mardonius himself thought that this would be a great opportunity for him to show his might, especially after having lost the first Persian invasion with Darius.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have here is we talked about the separation, the division within the Persian land force, as well as their navy, leaving people behind, as well as moving back to Sardis. Coming back to the Greeks, there's still more division amongst the Greeks, and this is more about, okay, so we know that the Persian fleet, the majority of it is fleeing. We also know that a lot of the land troop is going, heading back north across the Hellespont. Themistocles' feeling was, let's pursue them. Let's make sure that we can just cut them down while they're fleeing. Eurybiades, he has a winning argument, which is, let's just let them leave. Because if in the event that they remain behind, either to fight against us or just to be hosted by other Greek city-states within Greece, we're still going to have to deal with them because it's going to entice them to stay here. So instead of actually pursuing them, what Themistocles goes on a campaign to do is to really extract a lot of tribute from those islands that had Medized and supported the Persians. So we're done with the Battle of Salamis. Now we're on to the Battle of Plataea.
Lisa, can I ask you one question? When you say they could extract tribute from the Medized islands, that suggests to me that the Persians did not leave any defensive infrastructure in those islands to help them protect themselves against retribution.
The Persians, as a general matter, didn't have a strong naval fleet aside from the ones that they had culled from, like, to create an invasion. Didn't have, like, for want of a better term, a standing navy. So the expectation was for the islands in the Cyclades and the Dodecanese that were part of the Persian Empire, they would be responsible for their own naval defense. And so since the Athenians brought the full weight of their navy against these islands, they were able to exact tribute from them. In fact, the relationship between Athens and these other islands, especially in the Dodecanese, will be something that is held, is very negative. Their view of Athens is very negative, despite being in tribute to them during the Peloponnesian War, because of the way that they basically pushed their hand to be part of the Athenian Delian League.
But then that wasn't the case north of Athens in the Medized regions. They were able to protect themselves against Athenian retribution.
Well, those were land territories, so the Persians could defend them by land.
Did they leave behind Persian forces?
They left behind administrators and garrisons. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on.
I don't know how many soldiers they left behind, but they had garrisons.
So the Battle of Plataea, and I like to start off with this basically quote. And the exact quote is somewhat under, again, debates amongst historians, but it's called the Oath of Plataea. And it's to make common cause with the Athenians and advancing to Plataea in a body to fight to a finish for liberty. This was something that the Spartan commander Pausanias, who is going to be the main commander out at Plataea, he is the one that instituted this. He was very much aware of all of the dissension between the various Greek city-states that were for resisting Persian advance. The idea of them continuing to have this, infighting when you've got the Persian force still present within, fighting distance, was not something that he could handle. So he enforced this oath of Plataea amongst the commanders. And why an oath? I just kind of touched on that here. It was, it had to be taken by all of those that were fighting at Plataea. There was evidence, from the Peloponnesians that kept wanting to peel off from Salamis, even as they're getting ready to go to battle against Persia. And also the Peloponnesians had a history of being late to battles. I think that we did talk a bit about that in previous discussions, like at Marathon as well as at Thermopylae, that because of religious festivals that were happening, there were delays from various hoplites coming to help in the defense of those particular participation in those battles. So that's why Pausanias, which this is a nice image of his bust at the Capitoline Museum in Rome. I wasn't able to find a really great, a visual, except I found this engraving. I think it's dating from, it's dating from 1880, which shows kind of what the landscape of Plataea, at least in the 1800s, looks like. And also you can see that there are some mountains here. There is kind of a plain area, and I'll get more into the geography or the lay of the land and why it's important. But note that geography does play a huge role in how well certain makeup of land forces are able to fight. And it's really important to us to understand that elevated positions, of course, give an advantage, which will be used. So who's there at the Battle of Plataea? This is one of the first times when the Greeks have a show of force that's not so much of an underdog position as it had been previously, like at Thermopylae or at the Battle of Marathon. There's about 80,000 Greeks, and they're from tens of different city-states. And there are about 120,000 Persians, I believe, that are taking place here and here. The Persian situation is here across the Esopus River. Here's their big Persian camp and stockade that they had. Then there are Spartans, Tegeans, and Athenians, and other Greek allies that have positioned themselves. They first start off positioned here, and they'll advance to here in a line, and they are at a more elevated position. And what's important to note is that each of the commanders in both of the camps knows that the way that they have their land troops positioned is to their advantage. And for battle tactics, from the Greeks' point of view, they want to maintain a defense. They have a waiting game that's going on here. They have an excellent supply chain that's been guarded, and also it serves as their communication chain as well. The omens that they continuously take day in and day out prophesize that, whoever remains on the defensive position will be victorious. The advantages that they have are as follows. They have high ground, they have a great view of the field below them, they have an excellent water source. Although there is a plain that stretches out in front where a battle could be held, it's rocky. There are potholes, there are hillocks in it. So it makes for a challenging assault from cavalry. Pausanias also knows that the Persian supplies are dwindling. They don't have as much of that naval support as they once had. So they're not getting as much supplies for a holdout as they previously had. So the battle doesn't take place for quite some time. It's an 8-day standoff. Both know that their positions are advantageous, and there's no reason to leave their positions, but the price is high. Persians are running out of supplies, no naval reinforcements. And for the Greeks, you can imagine just sitting there and waiting and waiting. It's eating away at their morale. They're becoming irritable. While they do have rations and water, it's not like they're eating and resting very well. And there are defections and conspiracies that are starting to kind of crop up, with some people wanting to peel off, some of the hoplites wanting to peel off and actually trying to. The Persians are eventually forced to act because of dwindling supplies. And maybe if you would want to speak to this, Richard, and I can add in some things, or I can go forward.
Sure. So as Lisa pointed out, the Persians were in a position where their supplies were dwindling, and even though the defensive position was favored, they couldn't do anything but attack, because otherwise they would die just simply from hunger. So I don't actually know the method that the battle took place. I thought that they marched forward, but the actual tactics I don't know.
Yeah, so the cavalry lead, Masicetus, I think, not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he is sent out with the cavalry, just a contingent of cavalry, and no land troops at this time, or no Persian like archers or fighters at this time. But he is sent out by Mardonius to actually just kind of test the terrain and entice the Greeks out of position to come and attack. So it's more like just like an annoying tactic. But the Greeks went forward a little bit, but not a lot. And what you're seeing here is actually an image from the Battle of Plataea. It's from the temple of the Athena Nike temple in Athens, and it's been attributed to a possible fight over the body of the fallen cavalry leader Masicetus. He will be killed during this event, and he was very beloved, from what I was reading, by his fellow cavalrymen. And with his death, the cavalry just kind of, disintegrates because there's no more leadership. It was surprising. And what I had also understood was that he is not killed because the Greek hoplites are in an inferior position, being lower to somebody up on a horse. But what they do is the Greeks kill his horse, which means the horse falls. He then falls, and they try and kill him by stabbing him, but he has the fish scale armor, which I believe Richard has covered in the past. And so someone ends up actually killing him by stabbing him through the eye. At this time, this really irks Mardonius, understandably so. He sees that his main cavalry leader has been killed and brought down, as well as some of his cavalry being killed. So he is able to actually find a way to intercept the Greek supply chain, which greatly disadvantages the Greeks, and he reroutes those supplies to the much needed Persian camp. The snipe attacks on Greeks that are getting to their water source starts up. And so the Greeks are forced to move to a further location to get their water. In that new location where the Greeks are getting water, the Persians are actually able to poison it. And I'm not quite sure how they poison it. And Pausanias just, appears to absolutely do nothing. And the Greeks are starting to get kind of mad, like, we got to take action, we got to fight back. And he keeps holding that we need to be on the defense. The Greeks are now in a very tenuous situation because they have no water and they have no more food supplies. What we have going on here is that the Greeks are actually going to retreat. And it is supposed to be an ordered retreat that Pausanias commands. It will go in waves. He needs to give up his ideal location at that Esopus Ridge, which had the height advantage. He doesn't want to do it, but he's forced to because of the water and food supplies. And he starts to move closer to Plataea. However, this kind of retreat, part of it starts at night, and it is extremely disorganized. And those that started the retreat wind up kind of scattered all over the place. So that nice, beautiful line that Pausanias had that was so defensive is now completely broken. Mardonius responds with cavalry charges and retreated sniping, inflicting some damage. The Greeks, though, seem like they are destined for a disaster. Now we have the decision to act with full force by Mardonius. It's 11 days in. He's lost patience. He still doesn't have really great access to supplies or water. He knows that it's possible that the Greeks could get more reinforcements to come and fight. He's good to go. He's going to basically go on the offensive. The plan, however, in the Persian camp is betrayed over to Pausanias by King Alexander of Macedon. You remember him maybe from some of the other battles that we've spoken about, where he again kind of is playing both sides. By his exposing the plan, it gives the Greeks an advantage. This here is just an image of coins that were minted during King Alexander's time from Macedon. Pausanias continues to, besides a retreat, seem to do nothing. You've got these snipe attacks. You got some of his hoplites are being picked off by the Persians. He continues to take the omens. He still seems to be waiting. It's not until some of the Tegeans that are part of the fighting force for the Hellenic League actually break order and fight back against the Persians. Pausanias finally gives the order for all of the Greeks to move forward and engage. This is what kind of the battlefield is looking like. You still have the Persian camp over here, and you can see that the Greeks are spread out in a couple of different locations. So what ends up happening is over here, you have the Athenians, and they are going to be engaged against other Greek allies for the Persians, fighting for the Persians. So they're going to go head to head over here. The Spartans are engaged with the Persian cavalry, which is seemingly a disadvantage to the Spartans, them being lower on the ground. They send a messenger to the Athenians asking for help and support so that they have more reinforcements. The Athenians, of course, respond, look, we've got our own thing going on. We cannot come and support. So the Spartans go up against the Persian cavalry. I'm going to jump here to the end, basically, of Mardonius. So here we saw that the cavalry commander was taken out pretty early on in the sniping attacks against the Greeks. And Mardonius, as he is commanding the troops, he's not sitting back like Xerxes was from his throne overlooking the battlefield. He actually is on a horse and commanding the Persian fighting force from the battlefield. He's on a white horse, and he ends up being felled by someone throwing a rock at him.
Basically, yeah. So Mardonius was on the scene. Of course, he's on a white horse because white is the symbol of purity, and he had his bodyguard of 1,000 men. But the Spartans were able to close on Mardonius' position, and Arimnestus from the Spartan side, according to Plutarch, threw a stone at him. The likelihood that this actually happened this way, that he was killed by a stone, is considered by most modern historians very unlikely, considering how few stones Spartans carried into battle. More likely, it was that he would be killed with a spear, and that the stone was used because it had been foretold by an oracle, and so it was backdated into the story. But the death of Mardonius really destroyed the Persian ability to marshal around, and a great number of Persians began to flee. Those bodyguards of his that remained were completely annihilated. So, yeah, there was an incredible amount of disorder in their camp. Yeah, so, and Artabazos, one of Mardonius' generals, who did not want to earlier engage in the Battle of Plataea, basically took his Persian troops and marched north to Thessaly. And so this really changed the Persian strength on the ground, because he brought the 40,000 troops with him.
Great. And then this is just an image that I thought was beautiful from the tomb of Darius I. And it's not a Mardonius, but it's his father, Gobryas, that's represented here.
Yeah, Gobryas.
Gobryas? Okay.
Well, that's the Persian name for him, Gobryas, yeah.
Gobryas, okay. So the aftermath of this battle is that the Persian losses were much greater than the Greek losses. Richard did mention that, the bodyguard for Mardonius was slaughtered. There were some Persian land force that were able to flee north. However, there were quite a number of them that went, if you remember, into that Persian stockade area to kind of like set up a defensive position, and the Greeks were able to break through and basically slaughter everyone that was left behind. The Athenians at this time proposed marching on Thebes in pursuit of those that have fled, as well as leveling Thebes, who was a Persian supporter. But they decide it's going to be too great of a price, and they just don't have the physical bodies to support any more losses.
Just to be fair, the Greek losses being 1,500 is the claim from Plutarch. There are others who, like Ephoros, who hold the claim as being 10 times that.
And I think that's totally fair. I should make that caveat.
Yeah. But it's definitely the case that the Persians lost significantly more soldiers than the Greeks did. This was a very good Greek victory against the Persians, and really made it clear that the Persians would not hold Attica or Boeotia.
Great. This image I just wanted to point out as I was reading was pretty rare actually to depict a Greek and a Persian on the same image, and this is from a Greek kylix. And we're just about done here. I'll just quickly, I think, summarize here what's going on.
May I add a little detail about this battle? The Athenian contingent of about 8,000 to 10,000 hoplites was led by Aristides, by the way, which is very interesting. And the historians still not sure why Themistocles was relieved of command after such a brilliant victory at Salamis, but Aristides led those to battle from Athens.
I think a part of the reason that I was understanding that Themistocles was still not accepted as being so such a great leader is because of not what he accomplished, but how he accomplished it. Because he kept, kind of flying in the face of Athenian democracy, right? Which was kind of like, voting a council and all, and he kept kind of working around the council when they would come together. So that was, I had understood, one of the reasons that the Athenians really did not muster that much support for Themistocles in spite of Salamis.
Yeah, so I'll take a little bit of this. So after the Battle of Plataea and the destruction of Mardonius' forces, the remainder retreated up north and back into Asia Minor. But the Greeks actually pressed their advance. So you begin to see a Greek counteroffensive against the Persians. The Battle of Mycale is the first of these new attacks. The Battle of Mycale was a naval battle, and it resulted in a Greek victory in the Cyclades, the Cyclades Islands, to the east of Athens. And this actually led to several of the Greek cities of Asia Minor, such as the Samians and Milesians, rising up in revolt. And so the Persians now had to recenter their efforts on controlling Ionia and maintaining their control of Asia Minor, which they hadn't had to do before. The Greeks also made a direct attack on the Hellespont. So the Athenians tried to sail to break down the pontoon bridges, but the bridges had already been destroyed. So the Peloponnesians, who had been part of the Athenian fleet at the Battle of Mycale and had originally come to destroy the Hellespont with the Athenians, decided to return home. The Athenians, however, made landfall, and they attacked the area of Gallipoli now, and moved further into eastern Thrace. They made for Sestos, which was the largest town in the region, and they besieged the city, and then they conquered it after several months because food ran out in the city of Sestos. And as a prize of war, as Zach pointed out in our last conversation, they took some of the cables that had been used to link the pontoon boats, and they brought those back to Athens. You also had the Greeks in 478 launching an attack on Cyprus. And Cyprus was part of the Persian Empire at this point. It's unclear what exactly happened at this point because Herodotus stops writing before the Battle of Mycale. And so we only have Thucydides' writings, which seem to be very historically inaccurate if we look at later periods. Thucydides argues that the Greeks took Cyprus and installed garrisons there. But considering how many times Cyprus was fought over in the Peloponnesian War, it seems unlikely because of the ways that it was being fought over. It was being fought over during raids, not by landed forces. The likelihood that the Greeks actually established any control over Cyprus as opposed to just raiding it during this period is very minimal. Now, the final attack was actually Byzantium. So the Greek fleet that had been in Eastern Thrace actually made their way all the way up to the Bosporus and besieged Byzantium. Now that the Greeks controlled both the Hellespont and the Bosporus, they controlled the direct route to the Black Sea. And this was the point at which the Persians seemed to have sued for peace. We have no direct evidence of the peace treaty that they signed. And so it's called the Peace of Kallias because Kallias was the name of the Athenian representative who supposedly negotiated the treaty. The treaty had three major components. The first one is that all the Greek city-states were supposed to be free, including those of Asia, meaning that they would live by their own laws. It's unclear if this means that the Persians would have to cede them independence or that they would be given increased autonomy relative to the other parts of the Persian Empire. The Persians were unable to bring their soldiers within a 3 days march of the Aegean Sea. Now, this would mean that the Ionian and Doric Greeks would have this ability to be more autonomous because they couldn't be subjected to Persian authority. And the Persian warships were not allowed to sail into the Aegean or into the Sea of Marmara. So that entire area, the Sea of Marmara, the Hellespont, the Aegean Sea, would be a Greek territory. But on the flip side, the Greeks would not be allowed to enter any sovereign Persian territory. And while it seems that this peace of Kallias would be deeply undesirable to the Persians, most of the themes that it gave, with the exception of increased independence for the Greek city-states along the Aegean coast, were things that were basically already functionally true. The Persians didn't have a strong navy at this point because of the losses at Salamis and Mycale, so they couldn't have enforced power in the Aegean anyway. And so the Persians sort of saw this as the new edge of the empire.
I just wanted to add to the Battle of Mycale actually happened almost the same time, the same month, in August of 479 BCE. And the commander of the fleet was that other strategos, Xanthippus, father of Pericles, was commanding the fleet. And also, besides the naval battle, they also had a land battle at that point. It was near the island of Samos. That's very close, and then Mycale is there in the vicinity of Ephesus, close by, and they had also a land battle there that Greeks defeated the remaining Persians.
Yeah, exactly.
And one thing I'll just add as well is that, you know, in addition to what Richard was talking about, for the Greeks, there is a shift in who is actually fighting a resistance or going on the offensive against the Persians. There's the dissolution of the Hellenic League about this time. The Spartan leadership, which was so instrumental in showing some resistance here, actually pulls back. And they no longer want to participate in the fighting against Persia. So there's a new league that's created called the Delian League, and Athens is the leading city-state amongst this league, and the Spartans do formally withdraw. That was the one thing I wanted to add. And I think that basically wraps us up. Richard, anything to add?
No, I think that sort of puts us at the end of the Persian Wars. Maybe the one thing to add is that when the Peloponnesian War breaks out, even though this Peace of Kallias exists, at least functionally, even if we don't have any direct evidence of it, the Persians do interfere quite heavily in the Peloponnesian War and are responsible for a capital infusion that leads to the Spartan navy becoming large enough to rival the Athenian navy. And it's possibly due to Persian interference that the Spartans are actually able to win the Peloponnesian War. So the Persians didn't leave this area alone entirely, even though they signed a peace treaty.
Richard, And
Yes.
Lisa, what I'm taking away from last week and today, and this is really kind of a new insight to me, is I'm hearing you say you might summarize this as the Persians lost the battle but won the war. In that it seems as though they did take a great deal of territory to the north of Athens on the Greek peninsula. And yeah, they lost these infamous battles, which we in the West have sort of focused on as these, epic achievements, thanks to Herodotus, etc. But that in point of fact, strategically, those were relatively minor battles for the Persians, and that they did walk away with a great deal more territorial influence, shall we say, if not direct control. Is that
I think that is accurate to the extent of this is the Persian Empire is this massive continuum of and was unrivaled by anything west of China at this time period. And so the Greeks to them were a problem, but it wasn't a problem in their scale of magnitude. From our perspective as Westerners, the fact that Athens was burned but the Athenians not destroyed was critical in creating the entire sense of Western identity and allowed for the Peloponnesian War to even occur. Because if it were the case, the Battle of Plataea had been lost by the Greeks and the Persians prevailed there, that Mardonius had been able to defeat that alliance and then move into the Peloponnesus, there would never have been an Athens after that point.
I actually wanted to add that Athens was rebuilt, and actually the major portion of what we know as a classical Greek happened after that. So it was not only it was rebuilt and blossomed, and the Persians lost almost all of their European territories very quick after that.
Yeah.
The biggest aftermath of the war is the emergence of the Athenian Empire.
Right.
So the Athenian Empire, all of that control of the Hellespont and the Bosphorus, the source of grain for Athens was the Greek colonies on the North Sea. So the ability of Athens to become an empire within 50 years was really the fact that the Spartans drew back, the Athenians didn't. They established their dominance. So it was in no way could you say that the Persians expanded their influence. I don't believe that would be the right thing to say.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't have more after the wars than they had before.
I was going to say that we talked about Thessaly and Macedonia and Thrace falling under Persian control, but as Paul points out, although they remained in Persian control through the Persian Wars, they became independent within the next 50 years. They all had revolts and things like that.
And also to keep in mind, when saying that they Medized, they were not conquered by Persia. Persia did not establish governmental operations there or anything like that. They were essentially a satellite kingdom that switched their alliances, as satellite kingdoms have done when they're caught between different powers, for as long as we have recorded history. So they retained the control of their environment when they saw that, it was kind of a rational decision if you were the king of Macedonia to say, I'm not going to fight the Persians. And then when the Persians are defeated and they flee, you're still the king of Macedonia.
I got it. Now, the other question I have, sort of overarching, having learned all this stuff in these past few hours, this week and last week, I can't quite fathom what was the Persians' problem, since they had such overwhelming, force. Why did they just fall apart in that insula? I see where it was probably.
And
you're kind of breaking it. You're breaking up.
We can't hear you.
And if you type in your question in the chat, I'll
I think I got the gist of it, which is, why did the Persians with these numeric advantages? And I think, one of the things that is, often not sort of studied in I call it sort of normal people history, is that, you know, when and where you fight a battle really
It's much more to do.
Also, the
Yeah.
question of the Persian numbers, let me just bring this up. People can see this. This is a book called History of the Art of War it's a 3-volume book by Hans Delbruck, who is, I think, considered the father of modern military history. And he engaged in an experiment, a very famous experiment, in which he got the cooperation of the Berlin Military Academy. And he actually put soldiers out on roads and tried to measure how long an army would be. And he says, basically, his conclusion was the army described by Herodotus would still have the tail of the army in Sardis when the head of the army reached the Hellespont. In other words, the numbers are not just exaggerated, they're absurd. And the numbers in the wake of his work that historians tended to believe were the real size of the Persian forces would be 60 to 80,000, not hundreds of thousands, certainly not millions.
And so one thing I will add to this topic is, and I think that we talked about this actually in the first presentation, which goes back a couple of weeks, almost a month ago, I think. And it was a very similar question, but there was one reason I think that was pretty major in terms of how could the Persians have lost. Now, if you look at the Persian force, who comprises the Persian force? It's not just Persians. It's actually people that are vassal states that are subservient to the Persians, right? Whereas the Greeks are fighting for their homeland. And that's really important because that is going to give people more momentum. They have a vested interest in actually protecting not only their land, but their way of life, which the ones fighting for Persia, that wasn't the same case. They could fight just so that they save their skin, basically.
I got a kind of a question. Maybe Ralph can come in on this. I know that one of the common misconceptions people have is that these galleys were manned by galley slaves. Now, this was true during the Roman period. It was emphatically not true during the Greek period. The rowers on the Greek galleys were free men, they were citizens. But what about the Persian allies? Did they have slaves manning their ships? Do we have any source information on that?
Certainly Rome had slaves.
The Romans definitely had slaves.
That was pretty accurate.
But what about the Phoenicians and the Egyptians and so forth?
I don't know if the Persians had any specific policy on this. I would imagine that it would be different based on who were running the ships, right? That the Phoenicians would have one policy and the Egyptians would have another policy. I don't imagine anything unified across the empire. And I don't believe the Persians would have written anything about this because to them the issue of slaves was just not in their interest or concern. So I think it's a big question mark.
Yeah, I was not suggesting a unified policy. I was just saying that, what do we think the Phoenicians did? What do we think the Egyptians did?
I would imagine that the Phoenicians were less likely to use slaves. That would be my intuition.
Hey guys, we're gonna do Phoenician next week.
Yeah.
Leave some for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this kind of opens a good question that we might follow up next week.
Right.
Correct.
But I think that the Phoenicians sort of valued their seafaringness as sort of a cultural mark more than, let's say, the Egyptians did. So I think we'd be more likely to have slaves in the Egyptian galleys, for example, than we would and triremes than we would in the Phoenician ones. But that's just my intuition. I don't know.
I would agree because they had a lot of slaves, while Phoenicians and Greeks didn't have.
I have a biggest question. That's the overall. Have the Persians won the war? What would happen to Greece, and would the Western society had survived, or they would left them to their own, and it would be.
I don't think there would have been a Western society. I think that if the Persians prevailed, that Greece would be as indistinguishable from a Western lens as Armenia or as Lebanon or as Egypt. I think it would be just another constellation in this larger Persian world. I think further than that, I think that Rome would never have had the cultural influence that it needed to become this sort of we say it was a republic, but it had this sort of element of democracy in that people were voting on resolutions and you had this sort of collaborative government. I don't think that would have developed. I don't think there would have been that influence to start in Rome. So I think that the concept of Western civilization would not have come to existence. So this was actually a really pivotal point, that if the West needed to survive, this was the moment that it needed to fight. So I don't think that's a mischaracterization on the West. I just think that from the Persian perspective, they didn't see it at the time as being this monumental thing, the way that we see it now, and rightfully so because of what came after it. But I think that's just looking back at it.
And it's interesting to note that for the Romans later, they understood that the riches of the world were in the East. I mean, they controlled the West, they controlled Gaul and so forth and so on, but the Romans, and that was why the capital of Rome essentially moved to a place where they could more easily govern both places. But the riches of the world were in the East. They weren't in the West. So there was a question of, was it worth the candle? It certainly was worthwhile to try to conquer Egypt. That was the gold source. But further for the West,
and grain source. Right. Yeah, Egypt was gold and grain. Gaul was nothing.
Well, gold and the Nile.
Yeah. I want to thank Richard, Lisa, and Rolf. This was really incredible. I am, in awe of you guys with how much work it went into, and I see the references.
I was going to say, this is probably 80% Lisa, 30% Ralph, and 0% me, and I know that the math doesn't add up. So
you're so humble, my friend. You're so humble.
You are. Very much.
You just basically presented the whole Persian side of things. Lisa did an amazing job putting it all together, and Rolf.
Mathematical enigma.
This is so beautiful. And one thing, Lisa, would you be able to stop sharing? I just want to show the schedule quickly. We have a lot of interesting stuff coming up. I just want to, quickly go over the schedule, if you guys don't mind. I apologize to hold you up a little bit longer. And this is all.
Guys, all presenters, thank you very much. It was absolutely fabulous.
Awesome.
Yes.
As usual.
Thank you.
I am, I think we raised the bar, higher and higher. And
our bar is very high.
I know. I mean, and so I just wanted to go over some things quickly. Sorry, guys. All right, one second. Let me open the schedules.
And as you're opening that, if I could just do anything, if anybody that's presenting on ancient stuff just wants some research help or anything like that, and I have time, please let me know. I'm happy to help. I love looking into this stuff and learning new things. So just reach out to me. I'm happy to help do any research. Yeah,
and if somebody wants to do most of the work for me, I'm more than happy to split a presentation with somebody. I prefer to do the modern stuff, but I can vouch that Lisa's an amazing partner. You'd be lucky to have her.
Sure. Great visual. Always.
No, this is just crazy beautiful. One second, let me just open this 2 seconds, and then let me share. Okay, all right. So what I want to just quickly skim over, the presentations we're gonna have. So next week we're doing Phoenicians. Rolf and Greg graciously agreed. Greg is going to do Carthage, which we know was a colony of Phoenicians and kind of went on its own. Rolf is going to do Phoenician seafarers, language, and alphabet. And he's going to talk about ships, which he touched on today a lot. Then, on the ancient side, we have another exciting presentation. Aaron Sergio is going to do Agoge military camps and Spartan lives, warfare. We talk about Spartan, but now we're going to dive into details. I always hear you guys want to get into more details, so we're going to get into Spartan life details. And then, therefore, we'll follow with me and Greg on Dalian League, which was mentioned today. on the modern side, Vlad had confirmed that he's going to do battle also on 11/25. And before we get into that, next week we have actually Battle of Stalingrad. And again, I apologize to, it was kind of like a quick type of putting together, but Aaron is going to present the German side of things. And I'm sorry, not Aaron. Herodotus is going to present German side of things, and Aaron is going to present Russian side of things. So we kind of dive in from both sides, and I want to have a pretty good discussion on this. Battle of Kursk might get moved because I wanted to do something different. Either I'm going to do English Revolution, if you guys into it, by Michael.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Who is writing a dissertation on it, or we can do a Karabakh War, which is a Azeri versus Armenia war, which is right now.
I'd be willing to help if you do Karabakh.
Yeah, I'd be willing to help on that one too.
Okay, well, why don't we take, and this is probably going to be bad, and it's a continuous situation, but let's say Richard takes Armenian side and you take Azeri side, and then will present from both sides what happened.
Give them a choice. What do they want? Maybe they
Yeah,
the other way around.
Richard Armenian. I think
Well,
Richard.
So guys, I grew up in Pasadena, and there's a very large Armenian population, and I got all of the good propaganda as a kid. So I can roll with that one if you want.
Yeah, then Richard.
I mean, I'd be more inclined to do Armenian, but I can do Azerbaijani. No. I can do Azerbaijani just as well. I understand them perfectly well.
But Richard, you have to do Turkish side and Azerbaijani together, because then it's kind of like one right now.
There's no Turkish side. It's all Turkey just stood at the border and just closed the border. They didn't fight. If Turkey had fought, they would.
From what I hear, they support them. They support them militarily.
They send foreign fighters, but if Turkey had actually fought against Armenia, there would be no Armenia.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course not.
Even the most patriotic Armenian knows that.
Yeah.
No, then the Russia would get.
So does someone want to help me with the Russian side? Because would be sort of fun. It'd be like 80% Armenia. Maybe that's how we do it. Like 80% Armenia, 80% Azeri, and then like 20% Turkey, 20% Russia. Because that's sort of, kind of, maybe what's.
Well, right now, what's interesting, Aaron, in the current situation, Russia is like withdrawal, and this is so.
Yeah,
crazy.
It's like
really, I don't understand what's going on, and they don't even want to get involved with this.
I think they're just waiting.
Yeah, exactly. It's like strategic Russia, weird hybrid.
Yeah, if they see Armenian losing, they will get involved for sure.
Exactly.
They have a military base there.
That's right.
Well,
and anyway, not to waste all our time on that, but I mean, the bottom line is both sides have basically said, we're not dying for your Nagorno-Karabakh issue. We'll die for your Armenia or Azerbaijan issue, because this is like their own Kashmir almost between each other.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to make this, so I guess what we can do is we can do Karabakh on the 28th if you guys are into it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is not going to be like a long drawn out presentation. I want to have a discussion. If you guys are good into it, and just have a great discussion on this 30-minute, like summary, and then a great discussion, and whoever reads any, hot topics you can present in that regard toward that.
I'll make some good Armenian food, and then, we're not together. Oh, well.
Yeah. We'll do dolma and all that stuff. And all right. So that's that. And then I'll move the Kursk, and then after Kursk, we'll do the English Revolution. And we're going to have Michael, who is actually writing a dissertation right now.
Awesome.
So he's going to present.
English Revolution sounds very interesting, especially if the guy writing the PhD work. I mean, that must be very interesting.
Yeah.
I
offered him actually, yeah.
You mean the 1688 revolution?
That's right.
Yeah. So the Oliver Cromwell, right?
Oh no, I was the when the.
Oh, you're talking about the Glorious Revolution? No.
Yes. So you're talking about the.
No, I don't think so. I think he's talking about the Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell. I don't think
it's Oliver Cromwell Revolution. That's not
the Glorious Revolution is not really a revolution.
No,
it's just a change of dynasty.
It's a Dutch invasion, actually.
Right. Yes, that's
Which
right.
is never presented that way.
So 1128 is going to be Karabakh, and And then 11.
Wait, 1128 or
You mean
1028?
1028?
I'm sorry, 1028 is going to be Karabakh. Which
Okay,
is
I gotta plan this yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. And then
Are you guys?
11,
Well,
11.
ask Richard and Aaron if they're okay with that. If their schedule is free.
I
They
mean,
just
10,
expressed they're
1028
okay with
works
it.
for me.
All
But
right.
Okay, Aaron, is it working for you? Does it work?
Let me. I mean, it should, but let me reach out to sort of Richard and see how, like, what's our scope creep on this thing that we want to have. So
yeah, exactly, because this could get long very easily.
well, we're two weird Rainman level guys, so that's already a problem. So we need to sort of like figure out how to like dial it into normality. So
Right, and Aaron, remember you're also presenting Stalingrad, so you know it's like.
Yep,
it's
no, I got
might
that
be a
one.
lot.
I got that one because remember it's all discussion, so it's not my
Yeah.
usual 17,000 slides or whatever. So
Sure.
Okay. So let's keep going. I'm still working on the. Okay, so then after that we're gonna do Kursk, and then we'll do English Revolution after that. So Kursk is gonna be moved to 11/11. John, you're okay with that?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay. So
And
we'll do
also,
once a month.
yeah, don't
One
forget
second.
the Pericles.
No, okay, yeah. And then please read Pericles, because on Wednesday, the 10/21, we have an ancient discussion, and we already have 15 people sign up for it. So please read the text if you can. If not, then
Even if you don't read,
listen
I
to
mean,
us.
the way it's going to be organized, we're going to read excerpts from it and discuss it. I mean, that's how I plan to do this. So even if you don't read, we'll read some of it, pieces by pieces.
And then I also ask if you can. So Mark is still on? Hello? No, Mark is not on. So I'm going to switch Mark presentation on wine with Richard Israeli one. I'm going to move you Israeli to that date, if you don't mind.
Sure. Which date is this now?
That's 11/22.
11/22. Okay.
Yeah, because Mark said that he might move his up a little bit because and stuff like that.
That's fine. So, but you tell me what you want. Do you want me to do the creation of the state of Israel, or do you want me to do the 11 wars? I think creation of the state of Israel is chronologically earlier, so it should go first.
Yeah,
But,
I agree. I agree with that.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. So we're moving number 7 to the number 4 position. Okay, that's fine.
Yes, 7 goes to 4. Yes, exactly. And then I still owe, Aaron, but he's doing a lot right now, so I don't want to throw that, Pacific War part 4. So we would have to probably kind of play, and I don't know, move the nuclear race because that's interesting to me. So Pacific 4 would have to be, we'll see how Hadrian, I can just replace it with the creation of Israel. That's going to be Pacific War on January 3rd. Kind of Pearl Harbor type of thing or whatever. You still on, Aaron? No, he's gone. All right, so that's good. And yeah, if you guys want to confirm any of your I know that Paul had said that he's going to do Greek art part 2. Peloponnesian War, there would be, sorry. Yeah, so we're all good. That's it, my friends, and this was an incredible presentation. I'll post this on the, would you want to present it to everyone? We've never done medieval modern Venice as far as a modern. So somebody just posted a question. We've never done a medieval modern Venice. But if you're doing Venice, then you should do, Venetian Republic and, and then also, who was there?
Right. I don't know who I don't know who Fraja is, but I was just sort of responding to their question.
Fraja is, what's his name? Jeff, right? Jeff.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No. So I was saying like,
not our Jeff, a different Jeff from California, from West Coast.
Okay.
Okay, he's still here. Maybe he could say what he wants to do.
I mean, he literally just posted it a second ago, so I was just sort of responding. Okay.
It's okay. Just ask him because he was telling me that it's hard for him to do a presentation. He's working right now, but let me ask him if he wants to do it.
Yeah. I mean, Venetian Republic might be fun, and considering how many things we have on that docket, probably the next new thing that we'll add will be in July or August of 2021. So it's a long way away. But I'd be willing to partner with somebody on that because I know the Ottoman side of it, but I don't really know the domestic Venetian side of it.
I think it could be a good follow through after the Kosovo War, right? Because it touches on Murad and all that stuff and the conquest of Constantinople, and we know that Venetian involvement in Constantinople and Murad and all that beautiful stuff, you know. So maybe it could be a good follow.
That's like 150 years after the Battle of.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's close, but it's not that close.
Yeah, like maybe at least 150.
So yeah, no. So I would put it at the end of the queue if we did it. And anybody who wants to join me in that, you know, thankless crusade, I'll take whoever wants to do it with me.
Well, I eventually want to get into those more interesting subjects like the Children Crusade, you know, where all the children got sold in slavery, 40,000 children or whatever. There was crusading, one of the last crusades. I mean,
even Venetian Republic, it's a big subject. I mean, how far? Where do you want to start? Where do you want to finish?
Yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, do you want to do the golden, you know, era or whatnot and stuff like that. So next week, don't forget, you know, we have Phoenician, we have Stalingrad by Aaron and Hadrian. Should be interesting from, you know, both sides, and we want you to bring your, I guess, you know, appetite and discussing it with us. Lisa, Richard, Rolf, amazing job, and everybody stay healthy. Second round is around the corner for COVID-19. You know, I guess that's not news to anybody, and I guess there's no more debate on the 14th. So
a free night. Have another meetup.
Wait, why don't we have a debate on the 14th? Is that our
because he doesn't want to do the over the Zoom.
It may change.
Debate was supposed to be on 15th.
Yeah. You don't know what can happen.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. Well, good. Thanks, everyone.
See you guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Nice one,
guys. Great
care.
conversation. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Bye.